about time for our 11 o'clock enrichment program. And this is a worldwide podcast. So yes, this is being broadcast across the globe on this beautiful day here in Ely, Minnesota. We have our little yearling out right now. She's out in front. Her name is Holly Bear, and she is about 18, 19 months old. And we have given her a little tube. And that tube is pretty much just a PVC pipe with caps on the ends and 2 holes drilled in it with some yummy treats inside. And so she kind of has to manipulate that tube, use her paws and her nose to get the food out inside. Now, the purpose of these enrichment programs is so you folks can see how black bears behave and how they use their paws and their noses to get the food out that they need. And this is not uncommon types of behaviors they have to do in the wild to get food, so it kind of stimulates their brain as well. Little Holly Bear came to us in December of 2013, so she's fairly new here to the North American Bear Center. And she was actually from Arkansas. So she was separated from her mother by a wildfire in Arkansas. So she was orphaned. She was then picked up by the DNR down in Arkansas. They tried to rehab her in Tennessee at a rehab facility to make her releasable into the wild, but this was not possible, and so she needed a permanent home, and that home is the North American Bear Center. Now, you may think, oh, she looks so calm and happy and relaxed, and that does not happen overnight. When we got her, she was a very frightened little bear. She was terrified of people, and as you may imagine, coming from Arkansas to Minnesota in December is quite the adjustment. So first things first, we had to get her to hibernate, and we're successful. And then when she came out in spring, our staff, especially the 2 women in our enclosure right now, we call them Mom 1 and Mom 2, they worked very, very hard to get Holly Bear well adjusted to people, her enclosure, and the other bears. And you may notice one of our staff members is actually kind of grooming little Holly Bear. Now, Holly does not allow very many people to do that. And so this is showing a deep trust and bond connection between this staff member and Holly. And the reason her coat is kind of scrappy looking, kind of matted, when she came to us, she had some skin conditions that were contagious. And so we actually had to separate her and keep her in a separate enclosure for a while. And so that kind of matted stuff, her little mohawk, we call it, on top, it's the fur she's losing and regrowing. So her coat's coming in. That nice black fur on the bottom looks really good. And even in the past few weeks, it's getting a lot better. It's a lot prettier than what it was a few weeks ago. So we're just trying to get the last little mats, little dreadlocks out of there. So Holly Bear kind of had a rough beginning here, but now she's pretty well adjusted. And she's actually become pretty good friends with our 7-year-old male, Lucky, who we will be letting out in probably 10 or 15 minutes. And what I mean by out, each of our bears has a separate enclosure, which is the size of a 2-car garage, roughly. And in that enclosure is a separate denning area. And so just for this enrichment program, we put all the bears in their separate enclosures so we could have 2 staff members in there with Holly and get her down so you guys can see her for as long as possible. So when we let Lucky out, we may see some playful behavior between the 2. They've built a very positive relationship over the past few days, and they've actually been seen chasing each other, climbing up trees together, and very good, playful, positive behavior. And we kind of suspect that Lucky, our 7-year-old male, is taking on kind of like an older brother role for little Holly. And when she was kind of in quarantine for the first few weeks, when we were trying to treat her skin condition, her and Lucky's enclosure actually share a fence. And so we saw some playful behavior between the fence, and we were hoping when we released them out together that they would continue that playful relationship, and they have. So that's really exciting. And even though Lucky is 7, and that is considered a sub-adult, so he's reaching maturity, he is as playful as ever. I think he still thinks he's like a 2-year-old. He's 335 pounds and still climbs up trees all the time. He's just a goofball. He'll bite his lower paw and roll down a hill and then get up and run back up it and then do the same thing again. So he's just goofy. And we also have 2 toys in the pond right now. We have a little rubber ducky and a buoy. And Lucky loves his rubber ducky. He loves to play with the toys in the pond. And on a day like today when it's nice and sunny, our bears can get pretty hot. They still have their winter coats on. And so if Lucky comes down, he'll probably head for the pond to cool off a little bit. And all of our bears have swam or been in the pond. We haven't seen, except Holly, we haven't seen her actually swim yet. She's gone about chest deep, but I think she's just kind of unsure of the moving water. She's definitely curious by it. She actually will go on top of the highest falls and kind of like bat at the moving water, which is really cute. So she's curious, but doesn't really know how to handle it, I think. So those are our 2 youngest bears, Holly, 18 months, and Lucky, who is 7 years old. We have 2 other ambassador bears here. We have Ted Bear, who is 17 years old, and he is 553 pounds, so he is our biggest bear. And even though he's our biggest bear, he's like a gentle giant, we like to call him. He's very sweet and loving. He's very mellow. He loves people and is very calm. And he and Holly, he kind of ignores Holly a little bit. So there hasn't been very much interaction between Ted and Holly. When we let Ted and Holly out together for the first time, Holly saw Ted and immediately ran away up a tree. I think just the pure size of him kind of intimidated her. And that's common behavior for a yearling in the wild. They spend a lot of their time up in trees. And that's because when black bears are scared or kind of unsure about something or a situation, their immediate response is to climb a tree, because that means they're safe. And black bears from a very young age can climb trees. And so most of the time, a yearling, so the age of Holly, 18 months, that's usually right about the time when a mother will actually kick out her cubs. And so for the first 17 months of a black bear's life, they're actually with their mom, they nurse, they depend on them, they look to them for direction, and then when they're about 17 months old, family breakup occurs, and so mother bears will actually chase off their yearlings, and they're very territorial. And they also they live in a matriarchal society. And so in Holly's case, her mother would actually give her female offspring part of her territory, but she would not give part of her territory to her male offspring, which is pretty interesting. So Holly Bear, if she were in the wild and still with her mother, well, she wouldn't be with her mother, first of all. Her mom would probably chase her and charge her out of her territory and give a chunk of it to her. So she would probably be in close proximity to her mother, but that mother bear knows the boundary line and will chase her own kin out of that boundary. So we have seen actually kind of a similar behavior between Honey, our 18-year-old female, our 4th ambassador bear here, and Holly. So our 2 females, Honey and Holly, have some pretty interesting interactions. Honey, she is our female and oldest female, and we call her Queen Bee because she kind of runs the show. And she actually chases Holly and does not like being around this little yearling at all. And so Holly pretty much found her place pretty quick and will run up. There's a deadfall kind of behind the pond, a deadfall tree, and Holly seeks that for refuge. She also seeks this white pine to the far left, the tallest tree that's half dead in the enclosure. She seeks that tree as well. Those are kind of her 2 refuge spots. And Holly is very aware of where Honey is. So once Honey comes out, I'm sure Holly will be scooting out up a tree. Now, she's safe up a tree because Honey does not climb anymore. And Holly is much faster than Honey. And that, again, that's very common behavior. And in the wild, the same exact thing would happen. Females would chase off yearlings regardless if they're male or female, if they're in their territory. And so, like I mentioned before, yearlings, so about 18-month-olds, would spend a lot of time up in trees because they don't really have their own territories yet. They're not quite sure where all the food is, and they're still getting adjusted to their environment. So they're kind of fearful, and when they're scared, they go up a tree. And so Holly Bear does that. She'll go up a tree when she's scared. She'll go up a tree to play. She was actually taking a little snooze on this white pine around 8:30 this morning when we had to get her up for breakfast. So she kind of stretched out on a branch and yawned when we called her down. And she eventually made her way down. So those are our 4 bears. We have Holly out right now, and Lucky, and Honey, I believe, will also be coming out. And then Ted Bear, who I think is taking a little snooze in his pen right now. So those are the 4 bears we have here at the North American Bear Center. And they have 2.5 acres in this enclosure. And it's pretty much just dense forest all the way back. They fenced in what was here when they built the 2 electric fences around that 2.5 acres. The pond is man-made, so are the falls, and the rock den to the right and the window den are as well. We also have this wooden, looks like Lucky Bear is coming to the far right. So that is our 7-year-old male. Now Lucky was also born in the wild. He was born in Wisconsin, and he was orphaned as a cub as well. And so he was separated from his mother. The Wisconsin DNR then picked him up, and he could no longer be released into the wild. And so we received Lucky in 2007, right as we were opening. So it was very lucky timing for this bear, and that's where he got his name. Now, he is actually standing on our scale. So we weigh our bears every week, usually Tuesdays. And so they stand on that scale, obviously very readily, just like Lucky Bear is doing. We'll usually feed them some food. I think they're probably giving him some peanuts in the shell. And then there's a little detector monitor inside, and we can read their weight. And we do this because we feed them. We're their main food source. And we want to make sure they're as healthy as possible, so they're not underweight, not overweight. And weighing them is a good way to measure that. So some other things we feed our bears, we feed them 5 times a day. Excuse me. And in the morning, we usually give them some romaine, like a romaine head of lettuce, with some carrots or an apple. And then they also get a raw egg for some protein. We often get asked if we feed our bears raw meat or fish or things like that. And we do not. They don't get any meat. And that's because black bears are omnivores. They're not carnivores, not herbivores. They're omnivores, and so they eat mostly vegetation in the wild. And only 10% of their diet is protein, and a majority of that 10% comes from bugs. So immature ant and bees is usually where they get that protein. Looks like Holly Bear is kind of taking over Lucky's cube. But as you can see, they're very calm. And they're both extremely playful little bears. Well, little and big bears. And it's interesting that Lucky is allowing her to play with his cube. So that cube was intended for Lucky for his enrichment. But he's just allowing little Holly to play with it. He's totally not even fazed by it. So definitely a positive relationship between the two. We're very excited to see this. It's just been the last week or so that we've seen Holly, I would even say the last few days, we've seen Holly this comfortable out and about. So We're really happy about that. Anyway, getting back to their food preferences and what we feed them. So we give them an egg in the morning, a raw egg, for their protein. And then throughout the day we give them a wide variety of like nuts, so peanuts in the shell and out of the shell, unsalted of course, Brazil nuts, dried cranberries, dried apricots. We usually put those in enrichment toys as well. Our bears, especially Lucky, love apricots. We also give them a wide variety of fruits. So I mentioned apples. They also get pears, plums, peaches, mangoes, avocados. All of our bears love avocados. And watermelon, all sorts of good stuff. And then at dinner, usually around 5:30 or 6, we make a little like bear trail mix. And in that trail mix there's usually nuts, some dried cranberries, some sunflower seed, and then something we call bear kibble. And it looks kind of like dog food, but it's just like a big chunk of kind of like dog food looking stuff. And that's just another source of protein. And so that's usually what they get. And in the wild, they love vegetation. This white clover we have planted in front of the pond. Our bears love that white clover. They eat a lot of grasses, leaves, flower parts, things like that. And then they eat a ton of berries. And those berries are really important for bulking up for winter. And so they love like star sarsaparilla berries, choke cherries, blueberries, wild strawberries. And we have some of those wild foods planted out in our enclosure too. And then they usually just eat bugs for their protein and nuts. And that's pretty much what black bears eat. They don't really eat red meat that much. They're opportunistic, so let's say they come out of hibernation in the spring and they come across like a wolf kill or something, so there's like some remains, some carrion. They may eat that if there's really nothing else available. But otherwise, most of the time, they're not hunters. They don't hunt like for squirrels. We have a ton of like ground squirrels, and we have some rabbits around here, and our bears just pretty much ignore them. Sometimes Lucky will chase them away, but he just kind of swats at them. He just doesn't really have intentions to eat them. But yeah, those are some things our bears eat, and kind of their diet. Looks like there's some other stuff on top of the rock den. I've been mentioning kind of winter and hibernation, and I'll just talk a little bit about that. So, hibernation is kind of regional. And what do I mean by regional? Well, black bears are found throughout North America, so up into Canada and down as far as Mexico. They're found in a majority of the continental U.S., so places like Florida have a black bear population, east, west coast, and all the states in between pretty much, like little holly bears from Arkansas. And pretty much anywhere that has this kind of habitat and a food source, black bears can live. And so hibernation, oh, looks like Holly is venturing in the water. Yay. PTZ driver, High Falls, Holly bears in the High Falls. And what do I mean by PTZ driver for you folks here? That is a worldwide volunteer who is operating our pan, tilt, and zoom camera. And we have 4 cameras that are live on our bears. So we have a pond cam, which shows this area, a PTZ cam that can pan, tilt, and zoom, and then we have a camera on Holly's den, and a camera on Ted Bear's den. And you can get to those by going to our website at www.bear.org, and there's a little link that says live cameras, so whenever you want, if you're just sitting at home and want to see some bears, click on our cameras and see who's out and about. Anyway, getting back to hibernation. So black bears are found, in really cold places and really warm places. And so places that are warmer and have food available longer of the year, there's less of a food stress. Usually bears from those areas hibernate a lot less of the year. Whereas bears like Lucky Bear, he's from Wisconsin, so he has northern genes. And he hibernates for a long time. I think last winter he went into hibernation in October. I think it was mid to late October. And then hibernated until the spring. So he hibernated a very long time. Whereas Honey Bear, our 18-year-old female, she only hibernated, she went in December. I think it was December 1st she went into hibernation. So that's a significantly less amount of time. And so we suspect that Honey probably has some southern genes in her. We're not entirely sure, but just kind of an educated guess. So for Holly Bear, since she's from Arkansas, you may think, well, it's a southern state, I'm sure she'll hibernate less too. But actually, Holly may have some northern genes in her. And that's because in the early 70s, I believe, Minnesota actually gave some of our black bear population to Arkansas. Arkansas had a very low black bear population. They were worried about it. And so Minnesota has a very large black bear population. The last estimate was about 25,000 black bears in Minnesota, so they have a lot. I think it's one of the top states for black bears. And so we gave them some of our black bears, and in return, we received some wild turkeys, because our turkey population is doing poorly. So in Minnesota, we have turkeys with southern genes, and in Arkansas, there are some bears with Minnesota genes. So Holly may have some actually northern genes in her, and she may hibernate just as long as Lucky. So I thought it's kind of interesting. It's a cool little story. But anyway, I'd like to thank everyone on the deck. You're being nice and quiet. Our bears respond very intensely to sound, so thank you guys for being nice and quiet, and thank you for coming to the Bear Center on this beautiful 4th of July day. I would like to remind you that the pass you purchased is a day pass, so you can feel free to come and go. I think there's a parade in town around 1, I think. Don't quote me on that. And so you guys can go check that out, check out some other 4th of July festivities, and then come on back before 7. We have 2 more enrichment programs, one at 1 p.m. and one at 4.